I'm Jenny Pirtle, and I'm an associate professor in the Department of Art at the University of Toronto, and I am the principal curator of Reading Revolution, Art and Literacy during China's Cultural Revolution. The exhibition began without a fixed idea of what it would become. It began simply because there are significant holdings in the Fisher Rare Book Library of materials from China during the 1960s that would potentially shed light on the period in China known as the Cultural Revolution. And with the impending 50th anniversary of the Cultural Revolution in 2016, it seemed like a good opportunity to explore how the Fisher collections might help us understand this moment in Chinese history. So what became very interesting was to see, well, first of all, that when it emerged that there were materials from 1966 to 1969, the question was what kinds of themes unified this material? Were there unified concerns, or were they very disparate materials? And if so, how would we either work with the kinds of themes they suggested or with the kind of diversity that that material might suggest? So what became clear quite quickly was that most of these materials in some way, shape, or form returned to the topic of Chairman Mao's quotations. The Little Red Book, or the quotations from Chairman Mao Zedong, as it was known in English through its official translation, was an influential book in the sense that it is one of the most published books ever in the history of the world. It was published more than 1 billion times. For a population of about 700 million in China, or more than 700 million in China, and then populations outside. It is divided into 33 chapters that excerpts works written by Mao in other contexts, and it tends to take longer essays and reduce them to a short, pithy, aphoristic form. But it was literally used as a primer. It was a standard text used for teaching children in grades 1 through 3 to read, and it was also used commonly in adult literacy. So it was a very influential book in the sense that not only did it communicate Chairman Mao's ideas on various topics, although some would say taken out of context because of the digested or abridged form, but it was ubiquitously read. There was an abundance of material that illuminated the quotations or existed in dialogue with or response to or represented the quotations that wasn't the book itself. And that was really interesting because I think outside China, we know that the book was important. It was certainly important outside China, very influential in civil rights movements in North America in the 1960s, but also around the world in many revolutions. But we don't tend to think of the impact or the material impact of the book in terms of how it led to the creation of other artifacts, be they posters, glasses, pins, photographs, toys. So these are the kinds of paper cuts, these are the kinds of materials that we find in the Gain collection from this period. In initially conceptualizing the exhibition, given the strengths of the holdings in posters, and given that I'm an art historian, I expected that the show would be largely about posters. But the first constraint to come our way was that came from the installers saying, ideally there should be 1 poster per case. So what originally seemed like it might be a very rich poster show suddenly had to focus around 8 posters upstairs in the Fisher Galleries. And so the question was, which 8 posters, what among those posters from 66 to about 71, was where I first started to look, would tell the most compelling story? Which posters were so rare that searching in Chinese and English, I could not come up with a single copy outside of Fisher. And so those were the posters chosen to structure the cases. And it just so happened that they are largely posters that reproduce one of Mao's quotations on each poster and then and also illustrate that poster. So by identifying this corpus of very rare posters, they also mimic the structure, or they could be arranged to mimic the structure of Chairman Mao's Little Red Book. So effectively, the structure of the exhibition came from thinking about when we get to maybe the 30 rarest posters in our collection, which 8 can tell a coherent story that can't be told anywhere else. And it's the ones that are now in the galleries that show us how the quotations were mobilized into daily life and into visual life, and how they helped people navigate the seam between visuality and literacy. What I would hope that people might take away from the exhibition is an opportunity to think about what books and literacy mean. So as citizens in developed countries, we take for granted far too often the ability to read. And we take also for granted our access to a wide range of reading materials. But one of the things I would hope that people might think about looking at these materials is, what does it mean to learn to read? And what does it mean to learn to read when everyone learns to read from the same book, or everyone is reading the same book? What is that conversation that happens? How do people's lives change in response to the shared experience of reading and a shared experience of literacy, especially at a time when literacy is growing and where it's quite novel for some of the people involved?